Can we start? Good evening, everyone. I'm happy to invite you all to Dr. Elizabeth George Memorial Endowment 6.
Preeti, you're muted, ma.
Am I audible now? Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm happy to invite you all to Dr. Elizabeth George Memorial Endowment Lecture 6. A special welcome to one and all who has joined us through YouTube. So before beginning the session, this is a gentle reminder for all of us to mute ourselves until the Q&A session. Thank you. Prayer is the key of the morning and bolt of the evening. It should not be regarded as a duty which must be performed, rather a privilege to be enjoyed. Now, Ms. Ida Jennifer, Assistant Professor, Department of Social Sciences, will lead us in prayer.
It is read from the quote of Eugenia Hurley that prayer is the master key that unlocks all the gifts and visions for one to live a life of purpose. Shall we all look to the Lord in prayer? Loving Father, the creator of heaven and earth, we thank you for gathering all of us in this virtual platform at this time as we come together in remembrance of Dr. Elizabeth George, who has lived life to the fullest. At this moment, Lord, we also remember all those who have nurtured, mentored, and motivated us, both as a department and as an institution, for who we are today. Lord, continue to bless the Department of Social Sciences and the institution that holds it also in the years to come. Place in the hearts of each one here the willingness to make a difference in our families, communities, and the world at large, and to be faithful to do justice to our calling as instruments in your powerful hands. Guide us and strengthen us, Lord, in times of distractions and uncertainties. Renew and revive us with your Spirit to walk the journey of our lives with happiness and humility as Miss George did. We also pray for you to help us in fulfilling the purpose of our existence as we keep leaving our footprints on the sands of time. Lord, we finally ask you to bless the guest speaker and those who have worked to make today the special occasion that it is. And for all of this, we give you thanks. In the matchless name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Ms. Ida, for a meaningful prayer. Now I call upon Dr. Anita Christine Tiffin, Assistant Professor and Head in Charge, Department of Social Sciences, to welcome everyone.
Being a part of the Department of Social Sciences of Lady Doak College is a historic moment today. On behalf of the Social Sciences family, faculty and students, we warmly welcome you to the 6th version of the Dr. Elizabeth George Memorial Endowment Lecture. Dr. Elizabeth George, an erudite scholar, an epitome of simplicity, was the head of the Department of Philosophy at Lady Doak from 1953 to 1963. She led a team that was responsible for the Department of Social Sciences becoming a reality in 1963. Dr. Elizabeth George is a model teacher for us to emulate. Today, we celebrate one more stalwart, Ms. Shanti Manuel, former principal of Lady Doak College. A then colleague of Miss Elizabeth George. Miss Manuel led Lady Doak into many firsts in the 26 years that she was at the helm. And she stands out for us as the great person who instituted this endowment lecture in memory of a colleague and friend. We formally invite and welcome our principal, Dr. Christiana Singh, who readily accepted to deliver the introductory remarks. Thank you, ma'am. We fondly welcome Dr. Roderick Owen from Mary Baldwin University, Virginia, USA, who is the speaker of the day. Sir will be introduced later, but I want to say he is a passionate and long-time friend of Lady Doak College, a strong pillar of support to our many students who visit Mary Baldwin University as part of our academic credit transfer exchange. And as a family, he and his wife Linda are part of the larger Lady Doak family. Dr. Owen, we are honored that you readily accepted to be the speaker today, and we enthusiastically welcome you on behalf of the Department of Social Sciences. The pandemic overturned our lives in many debilitating ways, but we, as naturally resilient as we are finding our way forward in a newer normal. Technology has come to stay, and today we are making best use of it. We warmly welcome guests, students, faculty from our institution, from other institutions, from other departments at Lady Doak College, and our very own student friends. Welcome. We specially wish to welcome our former faculty, Dr. Carolyn Esabai, Dr. Cynthia Mary Matthew, Dr. Rupa Ravikumar, Dr. N.K.J. Lakshmi, part of the family and still strongly with us in spirit. Thank you all for joining us today. The Department of Social Sciences is honored to have you with us. We are also honored to have with us today family members of Dr. Elizabeth George. Thank you for joining us. We warmly welcome you to this celebration of her legacy. Welcome, friends. Let's enjoy this shower of learning.
Thank you, ma'am. As we all know, this endowment lecture is organized in the memory of Dr. Elizabeth George. It's time for us to know who she is and her journey.
Janagana
I call upon Ms. Alice Elisa Sherina, Associate Professor, Department of Social Sciences, to introduce the chief guest.
We are so glad to have Dr. Roderick Owen in our midst. He has served as a professor at Mary Baldwin College, which is now an university, for 41 years, teaching introductory philosophy courses, applied and advanced ethics seminars, and honors courses to a diverse range of students. He has served as the chair of Philosophy and Religious Studies Department and as the director of academic programs in peace building and conflict resolution and leadership studies. His doctorate is from College of William and Mary, and his dissertation was focused on models for teaching ethics at the undergraduate level. Dr. Owen's areas of philosophical research and publication include character education, interdisciplinary approaches to the teaching of ethics, debates and discourse on global justice and global citizenship, and the relationship between ethics and conflict resolution. He is a member of the IPA, the Regional Philosophy Education Society, the Virginia Humanities Association, the Association for Ethics Across the Curriculum, and the Peace and Justice Studies Association. And he has presented numerous papers at conferences held by these and other academic organizations. Dr. Owen has been a friend and supporter at Lady Doak College for over 15 years, helping develop and sponsor a student exchange between our two colleges, as well as visiting and teaching on LDC's welcoming campus. As native of Wales, Roderick is a founding board member for the North American Association for the Study of Welsh History and Culture, and he currently serves as a board member on the North American Welsh Foundation. He also serves as an elder in the Presbyterian Church, USA, and as the English language tutor to the recent immigrants to the USA. Dr. Owen is married to Ms. Linda, and they are parents to 3 adult sons and grandparents to 1 adorable granddaughter. It's a great opportunity to have such an eminent person as the chief guest for this day. Welcome, sir. We now hand over the session to Dr. Owen.
Sir, we can't hear you. I think you'll have to unmute.
There we go. Can everybody hear me now? Good. So thank you for such a gracious introduction, a very generous one indeed. And it is an honor to be here, both because of my love of the Lady Doak College community, but also in recognition of Dr. Elizabeth George. Good evening, everybody. I am struck by how strong and how resilient Lady Doak College is. You all have made it through 2 difficult years as so many others, and that level of resilience and strength, I think you find in Katie Wilcox and in the founding of Lady Doak. I'm also struck by how you honor your traditions between Katie Wilcox, honoring the Doaks, but also the intelligentsia of Tamil culture who supported women's education in such a strong and progressive way so many decades ago. It's a wonderful tradition, and I will speak to the students here. I know that you are proud to be a part of the Lady Doak College community. I will say one other thing in terms of students. We have been so pleased to sponsor 2 students here at Mary Baldwin from Lady Doak. We have 2 students now. The International Studies Center has been instrumental, and it was so forward-looking of Lady Doak to create an International Studies Center, which reaches out to students and faculty, not just in the United States or in Britain, but indeed all around the world. That too, to me, is a part of the legacy of Lady Doak College. I also want to just say that it is a particular honor to recognize Dr. Elizabeth George. And I note that when she arrived in 1953, she was already a well-established professional with strong academic credentials and leadership, and she came as a professor of philosophy. Well, philosophy for several centuries included moral philosophy, which focused on what became the social sciences. So it is no surprise to me that Elizabeth George brought her considerable talents and commitments in the context of philosophy, but to establish a strong place for the social sciences of Lady Doak. That's a wonderful tradition, and I'm honored to play a very small part in that. So today, I want to talk to you about human dignity. And I will ask if we move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. There we go. So this is a long-standing discourse and debate. There have been people of many different disciplines in philosophy and religion, but also across the social sciences as well, who have examined dignity as a normative concept. I will talk a little bit about how we recognize and honor human dignity. Sadly, I will also point out how and why we sometimes violate human dignity and how to avoid those violations. I will reflect a little bit about just the sheer conceptual breadth and depth of dignity across time and across cultures. And then we'll end with some reflections and perhaps with some questions as well. All right, next. So if we could move on to slide number 3, please. Thank you. I believe that human dignity is a key normative element in what it means to be human. We know in physiological terms, we know in biological terms, we know who we are as a species, but there's a normative element, a value-laden element to being human. And it's based on the notion that we all wish to be treated in a way that shows that each one of us has worth, that each one of us matters. And at least in my discussions, my examinations, this sense, this yearning for dignity, I find it's across cultures. We have inherent value and inherent worth. So I believe that dignity, it's certainly related to respect and rights and notions of social justice. But from my point of view, and I hope I can convince you to share this, human dignity is foundational. It underlies the possibility of respect, the possibility of moving towards recognition of rights. So one aspect of human dignity, and we can move on to the fourth one, you're quite right to move on, number 4. One aspect of human dignity is, in a sense, our vulnerability. And I'll talk about this several times in the next 45 minutes or so. Vulnerability is often where the truth lies. We can be more honest, both intellectually and emotionally. We're less likely we'll violate either our own or others' dignity if we recognize that we are all vulnerable, that we all make mistakes, and especially during times of conflict. It's during times of conflict when character is often tested and revealed, when sometimes we're afraid to show that we don't know something, or we're vulnerable to any number of sort of emotional attacks. Here I often refer to a book called Leadership, Essential Writings. Sometimes we have over-dependence on others. We want them to rise to leadership. And one overlooked key to successful leadership is this deep recognition and consciousness of dignity, a deep connection to our own inherent value, our own worth. And with that vulnerability that we all share when our dignity is violated. So exercising our power, especially for those of us in leadership positions, and you're at Lady Doak, so I know that you are in leadership positions or you will be in leadership positions. Exercising your leadership and power wisely and humanely means recognizing other people's vulnerability and your own. And I believe dignity is the first step towards doing that. Okay, next, please. So here I really think about 2 extraordinary South African men, They were intellectuals, but they were also social and political leaders. I think you know both of them. One was Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And at one point, Archbishop Desmond Tutu was addressing an audience, and somebody asked, well, what do you do when you are stripped of your dignity? And Bishop Tutu said, no one has the power to strip us of our dignity. How do you think we got through apartheid in South Africa? This is the recognition of the core dignity that lies within ourselves. And not surprisingly, he referred to that other extraordinary South African leader. This is Nelson Mandela. And Nelson Mandela, in his autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom, he said this: prison and the authorities conspired to rob each man of his dignity. That assured that I would survive. For any man or institution that tries to rob me of my dignity, they will lose, because I will not be part with it at any price or under any pressure. And I will just add that not so long ago, a prison guard, an Afrikaner's prison guard, visited a university right next to Mary Baldwin. And indeed, this prison guard, who had watched Nelson Mandela for close to 26 years, left with a deep respect for Nelson Mandela, and he recognized that this was a man of dignity and depth, and it would not be possible to strip Nelson Mandela after 26 years. So it is so interesting to me that it is an Afrikaner's prison guard who has come to recognize the depth and the dignity of Nelson Mandela. So it's a mistaken notion that dignity only comes from external validation. There's a deep sense of self-dignity in each of us. It's that self-worth that gives us that power of resilience that clearly people like Katie Wilcox, Elizabeth George, and so many others have. Okay, next, number 6. So learning dignity is much more than just an intellectual task. As a professor, I love intellect and I love reason, but we need to think about intellect as embracing emotions. It has a moral component to it. We seek to understand the complex, sometimes the conflicted state of our own inner worlds, both emotion and reason, and all those social emotional challenges we face. Yes, academic studies are hard. Yes, the use of reason in the sciences and the social sciences is challenging and worthwhile, but we also have social and emotional challenges. This deep awareness of human dignity allows one to gain perspective, maybe to see some blind spots, and fulfill a deeper sense of connection with others, to engage in our own life with purpose and with meaning. So trust and respect, which are also, of course, very important, they must be earned in specific ways and contexts, in different ways in different cultures. But I am arguing dignity is inherent. Without truly expressing dignity at some point, others are going to feel like they are being distrusted, or they will become resentment if their own dignity is not recognized. All right, next, please. So, unfortunately, there is a violation of dignity in different settings. Often I've looked at it in different workplace settings. And this could include offices and factories, but just because my own work has often been in schools and colleges and in church and faith-based centers, I often see, you might think that there are no violations of dignity when it comes to schools, colleges, and churches. Well, that's not true. Violations of dignity do happen in many different settings. And when they do, people do not feel safe to speak out. They're fearful of the consequences. And I believe that one of the great temptations that leaders must avoid is coming to believe in their own superiority and not recognizing the inherent dignity of all the people who report to them. So a deep acknowledgement of shared human dignity is the counterbalance to somebody who is at the top in a ranking, at the top of a office or a department or an organization. In other words, we need women and men in leadership who truly understand dignity and act upon it. And I think too often, so much of the literature on leadership and ethics overlooks this core commitment to dignity. All right, number 8, please. There's a long history, of course, of philosophical debate about, and it comes from ethics and political philosophy. There are also plenty of religious traditions. The Catholic tradition particularly has a long focus on inherent human dignity. This is a topic that finds its way right at the beginning of the ICRC, the International Committee of the Red Cross. In their materials on international humanitarian law, they begin by teaching about human dignity. This is to officers not just in the United States, but in many nations all across the world. So there are some practical ethical questions, and I, as you can tell from that introduction, I'm very interested in how we engage in character and moral education. And I am advocating for dignity to be a core part of character education, whether one is a child or a youth or going through continuing education at an older age. There are questions: how do I treat others with dignity? How do violations of my own dignity, how do they make me feel, and how do they affect my ability to lead? What will it take to create policies and work cultures that recognize and truly nurture human dignity? How and why is dignity a foundational ethical ideal? And I might say, I don't mean to undermine or dissuade from other key character traits: compassion, empathy, respect. These are all important. I don't view this as kind of a contest between virtues. What I'm saying is, let's not forget dignity, and that dignity is a key starting point. Okay, number 9. So teaching leadership needs to recognize and honor dignity, and I especially draw upon here the work of Donna Hicks, who's done some fantastic work. And she's very good because she's not just a scholar, she's somebody who actually has gone into workplaces that have been torn by dissension and by conflict. And she's brought this commitment to understanding dignity as a part of her organization and a part of her ethos. So let's look at some of these elements. I guess we could say they are 10 elements of recognizing dignity. First, acceptance of identity. Approach people as not inferior or superior to you. Give others the freedom to express who they are without fear of being negatively judged. Interact without prejudice. Accept the characteristics such as race or gender or class or caste or sexual orientation or age. Accept those rather than judge them. Secondly, recognition. Validate others for their talents and their hard work, their help. Be generous with praise as you're in a leadership position, whether one's a teacher, a principal, a work supervisor, a president, or a chairperson. Be generous with praise. Give credits to others for their contributions. Next is inclusion, and make others feel that they belong at all levels of relationship, that they belong. And also safety. This is so core. Put people at ease, and not just physically, but sometimes, for us as educators and in settings, students and faculty alike need to feel that they are free from psychological or emotional damage. That could be done through shaming or through humiliation, public humiliation. They must feel free to speak up without retribution. All right, next slide, please. Number 10. Thank you. Also, being fair, I should add, treating people justly with equality, recognizing independence, that sometimes as people get older and they should be credited with more independence, empower, in other words, empower people to act on their own behalf so that they feel they have some control over their life and they can experience hope. Understanding, believe that what others think really matters. Give people a chance to explain their perspectives, express their point of view. Give people the benefit of the doubt. Treat people first as if they are trustworthy. So begin with the premise that others have good motives and are acting with integrity. We may be proven otherwise over time, but begin with that premise. And then as a leader, as a teacher, as an organizer, as a chairperson, take responsibility for your actions. Apologize if you have violated another person's dignity. Make a commitment to change hurtful kinds of activities. All right, let's move on to 11, please. So one of the things that I'm finding out in my readings in both social psychology as well as in neurosciences is that we are a species driven by motivation to connect with others. We're hardwired, if you will, to be social. And so I've drawn upon a number of different sources to sort of deepen my own understanding. And this is a step away from a generation of scientists, social scientists, biologists, back in the 1960s and 70s, who used to characterize human behavior as essentially ego-driven, selfish-oriented. And instead, I think what we're finding is, from a variety of people, that we are a species that also seeks cooperation, bonding. We want to forget the platitudes of egoism and self-survival and the selfish gene, which was a term used in the 70s and 80s, and instead recognize that we have strong social relations. And it's a key dimension for survival and our adaptation, both as a species and in organizational settings. So being socially ostracized or disconnected, it's painful. Maybe this has happened to some of you, as in whether it's in an elementary school setting or in a work setting. When you're socially disconnected, that's painful. In a sense, maybe even life-threatening, because people have lost that connection. All right, let's move on. So, in other words, social pain is real. There's an old adage in English, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. It's not actually accurate. Words and rhetoric do hurt, and they can be used as rhetorical weapons. There's pain from social interactions that violate your dignity. They may not be visible in a sense, but there are people around this world who suffer silently. In his book, The Power of Noticing, Othman argues that leaders often overlook social information right in front of them. Sometimes leaders do this unintentionally, but others are explicit. They're oppressive. They want to devaluate and humiliate other people. This is an awful, toxic situation to be in. I am personally very fortunate. I've never been in a setting like that. And I hope that all of you are able to avoid such a toxic setting with leaders who expressly violate people's dignity. So emotional volatility is associated with having one's dignity violated. And it is very difficult. And as I say, there are neuroscientists and others now who are examining the possibility of having a more caring and a more compassionate organization. These authors, Perry and Slavitz, talk about love. I'm not sure I would use the word love. I would use the word compassion and incorporating compassion into one's leadership. So combining compassion with that recognition of inherent dignity. Okay, let's move on to 13. If we're going to lead people, we better understand them and honor their inherent dignity. That's the foundation. The goal is to create an organizational culture. Again, whether it's a factory, a school, a work office, where honoring dignity is the priority. People will feel more secure. They'll feel safer. They will be more productive and creative. And what I have found that even in the business world too, I should say, especially in the business world, there's been more and more research and writing in the last 20 years. It may not say dignity, but it's focused on the broad humanistic approaches to recognizing somebody's fundamental value and self-dignity. This challenges that older dominant narrative of self-interestless, even in business, promoting self-interest, ruthless competition, profit maximization. For example, here at Mary Baldwin, our business department has renamed itself. They have classes on sustainability. They're not making huge distinctions between profits and not-for-profit. They're drawing upon the social sciences and neurosciences to talk about how you create a creative, ethical culture. And it's one that strays away from this notion in the 60s and the 70s that business has to be cutthroat, that business always involves self-interest. So these ethical dimensions are a part of an integrated humanistic choice of a workplace that recognizes human dignity. All right, number 14. So Pearson is the business researcher, challenges assumptions who assumes we're motivated by ego. Instead, we share a deep motivation for the common good. Actually, the Harvard Business Review, arguably one of the most influential business journals, has had several issues, including one major issue focused on dignity and ethics in the workplace. Ethical leadership creates a safe and trusting environment. It promotes autonomy and independence, a sense of belonging. Leaders who undermine employee autonomy and dignity, I might add, are corrosive because they undermine the dignity of work and the dignity of an individual. The enlightened leader knows how to treat people with dignity. And so there's a number of different works all along these lines. Okay, let's move on. So, how and why, I'm going to talk about the more, I suppose, the more negative parts of it, but we need to talk about this. What about violations of human dignity? Why do people do this? Why do people in leadership positions insult others and demean others? What insights can we draw from the social sciences and evolutionary psychology? Well, again, we are Homo sapiens. Our brains have a complex inherited structure that predisposes us to think and act in certain ways, but especially when we're under threat. And when I say under threat now, I don't mean just people, under physical threat, like the horrible situation in Ukraine, but I also mean people who are under threat in terms of their own emotional safety. People who feel threatened in a workplace or a school or an office, where they feel under threat because of words and treatment. And we are biologically, we are hardwired, if you will, at a basic biological level, to fight, to flee, run away, or to freeze. But the great biologist, E.O. Wilson, who just passed away a year or so ago, he points out we do have other inherited traits. Sometimes that are reinforced by cultural-based soft wiring. We can learn to temper the impulse to look bad in the eyes of others, no matter what the expense. We can expand. We can learn to temper that impulse in the eyes of others, and we can expand our capacity to manage these gut-level emotions, fight or flee. And this is partly what it means to teach about dignity. So how do we do this? How do we violate dignity? What are the temptations we have? Well, here are, probably about 10 of them again. Here they are. And I think this might resonate with you all because I think this happens in so many different cultures. First of all, taking the bait. Don't let the bad behavior of others determine your own behavior. Restraint is the better part of dignity. Don't justify harming somebody else who has harmed you. Sometimes do not do unto others as they do unto you if they're engaging humiliating, undignified, or at worst, violent behavior. Second, saving face. This is so important in different cultures. Don't lie, cover up, or deceive yourself. Tell the truth about what you've done. So many things happen when leaders want to save face or people want to save face that lead to violations of dignity and a healthy workplace. Third, shirking responsibility. When you have violated the dignity of others, admit you have made a mistake and apologize for hurting them, preferably in a workplace publicly, certainly privately. Fourth, sort of depending on false dignity. I mean, this is, you might say this is a notion of shallow reputation, because people generally they worry about what other people think of them. And so there's a desire for external recognition that's kind of shallow. But if we depend on our validation and for others, then we're seeking false dignity. Our dignity comes from within. Here's another one, remaining in false security. I believe this is very similar to the work I've done in peace studies. There are false forms of peace and there are false forms of security. What do I mean by that? Well, peace that is dominated by one controlling force, and it's peaceful only because there's one authoritarian leader who makes sure that everyone behaves themselves, that grants very little autonomy and very little freedom, is false peace. Same thing with false security. Don't let your need for connection or compromise your sense of dignity. In other words, if we remain in a relationship where our dignity is routinely violated, then it's our need for connection has outweighed our need to maintain our own dignity. Avoiding confrontation at all costs is another factor. Don't allow somebody to violate your dignity without saying something. Stand up for yourself. We can't avoid conflict. And again, my work in conflict studies doesn't mean we avoid conflict. It means we handle conflict in just ways that don't violate a person's rights and dignity. There will be conflict in all cultures, in all work settings. I think I mentioned earlier, I've never been to a school or a church or a faith-based setting where there hasn't been some conflict. To honestly admit it is a part of recognizing human dignity. And then another part of it is, this is particularly dangerous. I find this happening so much in the world today. Assuming or asserting one's status as an innocent victim. Open yourself to the possibility you might be contributing to the conflict and the problem. That is a possibility. Okay, number 18, please. So, rejecting or resisting constructive feedback. We all have blind spots. Even top leaders, sometimes especially top leaders, need to overcome their self-protective instincts and be open to constructive feedback. Sometimes this can be very ugly when you aggressively or surreptitiously blame or shame others. If you do it surreptitiously, this can be almost in the tradition of that medieval philosopher Machiavelli, where you're going behind covers and in deceptive, secretive ways, you're undermining the authority or the respect for others. A leader who engages in this is not recognizing human dignity when they shame others, whether it's done publicly or privately. And I think this last point here is related. I believe that gossip, promoting a false or artificial form of connection, is another way to violate dignity, because it gets around honest exchanges. And so I would say there are faith-based, religious reasons not to engage in gossip, but there are also ethical reasons as well. So there's a quick summary of violations of human dignity. A lot of it, in my view, comes down to the desire that we don't want to look bad. We don't want to lose face in the eyes of others. These are threats to our social standing, and they can trigger, almost at an instinctual level, self-preservation. The social psychologist, who I'm sure my colleagues in social sciences know, Jonathan Haidt, is a well-known social psychologist in America. He says people are often more motivated to protect their reputation than they are to be honest and truthful. Others suggest that the fear of humiliation runs deep. The felt need to ward off negative public exposure often will lead people to illegal and unethical behaviors. The shame that is felt when we are exposed to wrongdoing is so strong that we try to avoid it at all costs. Let me see here, another point here. Yes, I also wanted to say, again, from E.O. Wilson, the biologist, we experience internal conflict. Relentless ambivalence and ambiguity are the fruits of that strange primal inheritance that rules the mind. We have to watch out for that. Let's continue on to 20. So I like to draw upon the great American philosopher here, William James. And he's an interesting figure. I think Elizabeth George would have known the work of William James, because he is an intellectual who broached both psychology and the social sciences and philosophy. And in many ways, the work of William James has come back to the forefront now in the 21st century, because he wasn't afraid to talk about reason and emotion. And I really have come to appreciate William James' distinction between the I and the me. And this distinction, I think, is helpful in learning how to recognize dignity. The me, so what's the me? The me is constantly acting and reacting. It's instinctive. It's lured by these temptations to preserve yourself, to avoid humiliation. More often than not, the me functions outside of self-critical reflection. And the me is rather self-centered. It wants external validation. It needs external validation. So the me is often guided by the judgment of others. Am I good enough? Am I smart enough? Am I lovable enough? Am I better or worse than others? So in other words, for William James, the me is very vulnerable to dysfunctional conflict because it's kind of defensive, it's reactive. It does what it can to avoid taking responsibility. It wants to protect the self. Okay, next slide, please. The I, by way of contrast, the I is not dependent on others for its sense of worth. The I knows his or her worth is unconditional. This is just like Nelson Mandela in The Long Road to Freedom. This is just like Bishop Desmond Tutu. They understand the I. The core self is open to learning about aspects of the self. The I is capable, maybe of you might say, a bird's eye view, a perspective and interaction with the broader world. It's more self-critical. It's a mark of authentic maturity. When we are firmly grounded in our I, we can experience all aspects of dignity. Unlike that me, one's goals are growth and creative expansion, serving beyond oneself. Again, whenever I hear service beyond oneself, I go straight to Mahatma Gandhi, who clearly was committed to a notion of dignity in service to others. And also, we need to develop a relationship between these two aspects of the self. So the I can, in a sense, can rescue the me when it does engage in self-destructive or dignity-violating beliefs and behaviors. That's when we need to draw upon the I. Thank you. So deeply recognizing dignity in both emotional and intellectual terms involves knowing that we are connected in three different ways. We're connected to our own dignity, our own inherent self-worth. We're connected to others by truly recognizing each person's dignity. And here's the key, I think, and especially for Lady Doak as a faith-based institution, and it could be any number of faiths. We need to be connected to the dignity of something greater than ourselves, a higher sacred power, to all of humanity, to a greater good. This is open to different interpretation, but this third form of connection, I think, is an important part of recognizing dignity. Really, you need to serve all three of these in order to be truly committed to leading a dignity-filled life. All right, next. So, as I mentioned, I think dignity can be recognized in many different parts all around the world. I've just given you a very brief sample here. I have cited a passage from the voluminous writings and speeches of Gandhi. Gandhi said, "Dignity of human nature requires that we must face the storms of life." It's interesting that our former president, Barack Obama, in the eyes of God, a child on the other side of the border is no less worthy of love and compassion than my own child. We can't distinguish between them in terms of their worth and their inherent dignity, and that they're deserving of shelter and love and education opportunity. We cannot isolate ourselves. We cannot hide behind a wall. That's former President Barack Obama, emphasizing the shared dignity of children all around the world. Okay, let's move on. And just briefly, I'm going to leave this PowerPoint with my friends at the Department of Social Sciences. So any faculty member or student who would like to open these sites is welcome to do so. Before I talk about these, I now wish I had also included another emphasis on dignity that I believe all of you are very familiar with. You know far better than I do the legacy of Tiruvallur and readings and writings from the Quran. This is part of Tamil culture's contribution to ethics all around the world. And in the Tirukkural, which is universal in its scope, secular, as you know, it's 2,000 years old, rooted in ancient Tamil culture and language, guess what's there? Dignity. This is what Tiruvallur said. It may be essential and important, yet let it go if it is beneath your dignity. Also, it may be fatal not to do it, yet let it go if it lowers your dignity. In times of prosperity, humility is needed, but during poverty, don your pride and your dignity. When people slip beneath their dignity, they are lowly as a hair fallen from the head. And then I'll give one more example. Living on to preserve your body when the greatness of character is gone. Is that the elixir of life? Preserve your dignity. Let's go back one slide just for a minute, please. So these are examples. I'll just mention there is a Global Dignity chapter in India, and there's a website there if you'd like to see who are the leaders and who contributes to global dignity movement. There is a wonderful group that was honored of women journalists who focus on dignity of women and lower caste peoples. Their commitment to women-based journalism was honored in a documentary called Writing with Fire. And if you have not seen it, I highly recommend it to you. This is probably this group has been dedicated to women's but the documentary, Writing with Fire, is a new one. And I would say Writing with Fire and these women journalists are rooted in a sense of shared human dignity all across India, with a special focus on the status of women and lower caste people and Dalit. Okay, we can move on then. To 25, please. Again, I'm going to leave this so you have time to look at it. In my view, the American scholar who's paid especially close attention to dignity and dignity in the workplace is a philosopher by the name of Michael Sandel. And his focus on the dignity of work, especially in his book, The Tyranny of Merit, Whatever Became of the Common Good, is pivotal. So this is an intellectual analysis of dignity, but it's also very accessible because essentially Professor Sandel is saying we have overemphasized merit and meritocracy. And it's not that we don't want people to excel, but there's also sometimes meritocracy can be so cutthroat that it fails to recognize our shared humanity and the fact that we are equal in dignity. He provides many examples from American life and American workplaces of how and why we cannot just depend upon merit, but also need to have a common commitment to all workers' dignity in the workplace. I've given a couple of websites there for spoken presentations by Professor Sandel, as well as some of his written work. Okay, we can move on to 26. So nothing should make us feel insignificant when we are connected to this inborn sense. I'm not going to give an example now because of just the sheer amount of time, but we need to be open to creating more humane workplaces. We need to practice how to honor dignity. We need, each of us as individuals and collectively, we need to know when we are being lured away by these temptations of humiliation and saving face and controlling others. We need to defend dignity of others within our own classrooms, our own workplaces, our own churches or mosques or temples. Leaders need to take responsibility for dignity violations, whether it's one that they have done or others within. They need to avoid pretending this just didn't happen. They need to face those who may perhaps their dignity have violated. They need to move beyond saying sorry and committing to real change. Okay? And because of my interest in leadership, of course, I focus on this quite a bit. Too many people, too many theories in leadership focus on charismatic, feel-good, motivational forms, but they don't focus enough on trust and respect and underlying dignity. And I do think that Mr. Heifetz, Dr. Heifetz, in this book particularly, does get at this notion of democratic insight and ethical sensitivity that opens up humane leadership focused on dignity. Okay, we can move to the next. We cannot solve, well, this is a famous quote from, 70 years ago. This is Albert Einstein. We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. Thinking about dignity this way is a different way of thinking. And it especially becomes important during times of conflict, because it's in times of conflict often when we give up our humanity, when out of fear we're either withdrawing or fighting and forgetting the sense of dignity we have. We violate our own dignity as we take others away. Leaders who fail to consider truly what we might be doing to contribute to the problem of conflict, instead of thinking, well, I'm a leader, I know better, you should ask questions. What might we not be seeing here? This ability to pose open questions requires a deeper understanding of human development. Okay, let's move on. So I think I want to leave time here, and I'm sensitive to taking too much time. So I think what I'll do here is I'll move on to slide number 30, please. Too often leaders are vulnerable to having their dignity challenged. It's more than they can tolerate. Sometimes they're trapped at some sort of dependent stage, that me I referred to. They're fearful, they're scared that without external praise and approval, they might lose their dignity and their power and their authority. There's a connection between developing a deep understanding of dignity and our ability to exercise effective and ethical leadership. Is it possible that some leaders have arrested development, so they can't do this? Does the fear and anxiety associated with losing one's dignity underlie the anticipated loss of losing face, losing your power? Are many leaders unaware of the fragility of their inner self, but their dignity resides there, its self-worth? The power of dignity is something that we need to teach and we need to celebrate. A conscious commitment to dignity of self and others serves as a moral compass. It's grounded in the knowledge of our inherent value and our own vulnerability to others. All right, one more. Again, I'm leaving this. There are character education movements for children and youth around the world, and I've left some links here. I hope that this expands during our lifetimes, and that there are more opportunities in different cultures and different nations around the world to teach dignity to children and to youth. Sometimes when Donna Hicks, the person whose work has shaped mine, when she goes into workplaces, she's working with adults who have already violated human dignity and people who are chair people. Sometimes, isn't it better that you work with children and youth to teach them what dignity really means, rather than wait till you're 50 years old and already violating dignity? And one final slide, please. So I'm concluding with just some very open-ended questions. These are just something to consider over the coming days, perhaps. Does teaching and learning about dignity, both one's own and others, can it lead to better, more caring, more collaborative leadership? In your own experience, have there been some egregious violations of your own human dignity? How have you felt? How have you responded when your own dignity, your own worth has been attacked? How and why does this conception of human dignity allow us to work through conflict and disagreement in an ethical, humane way with civility? As I mentioned, there will always be conflict, but does this help undergird conflict so that we move through it in ways that are civil? What are the differences between gaining respect, advancing human rights, and recognizing and honoring human dignity? Again, I do not see these in competition with each other or in conflict. All I'm saying is it's very difficult to gain respect and advance human rights unless we begin by truly honoring and recognizing human dignity. And then finally, the last point I want to make for you, both as an individual and as a member of any number of groups, including Lady Doak. So what steps might you take to advance a deeper understanding of and commitment to human dignity? Again, I know I've spoken very quickly. I hope my slides have helped explain where I'm going with this, but I so appreciate this invitation, and I am happy to respond to questions or reflections. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for a mind-blowing session. Now, dear participants, it's time for question and answer session. You can ask your questions. You can unmute and ask your questions. And YouTube viewers, you can even type your questions in the chat.
People are very shy.
Dr. Roderick Owen,
Yes.
while people put their thoughts together and word their questions to you, uh, I'm sorry I wasn't back here on time, held up in the office with different meetings. Uh, but I'm so glad that I didn't miss most of your lecture. I think I started following it when you were still doing the introduction, probably the third or fourth slide. And I want to say, on behalf of the Lady Doe College community, what a privilege and a blessing it is to have you as a part of the Lady Doe College family. Uh, Today we celebrate the life of a great person, Professor Elizabeth George, and it's quite a moving experience every year to kind of celebrate it, knowing what goes into your history, and it makes us feel a passion to commit ourselves to that legacy and make sure that succeeding generations get that benefit of these great investments that have been made in the lives of young women, and we carry it on. We are also blessed because this Lady Doe College environment has also brought us in contact with people like you who've become firmly entrenched as a part of the Lady Doe College family. And the fact that you are in another part of the world only makes our heart grow bigger and our network much stronger. The family connections are more intense. We are so grateful that you have continuously supported the college. You made our students who have the privilege of visiting Mary Baldwin University, you made them all feel at home. You've been a father figure to them. Sitting and listening to you today, I'm glad that I didn't give the introductory remarks, but I like that statement. I think that as soon as I came and I heard you say that no one can strip us of our dignity, that it lies inside each of us. And I think this is a message that I take away, that no one can rob us of our dignity. Also, that you were speaking on leadership and, how leadership has to recognize dignity. I carry away a lot from what you have said. And I want to make the first comment on this, that I will take this message back. I will put it into practice. I'm glad that you reminded me as a leader of how not to, violate dignity in workplace. There's a lot of dignity that is, lost in society, in every other place, as long as we feel that it isn't within us. But you gave me a lot of food for thought, how I, as a leader, should take the first step in, where there's a breach, to ensure that the breach is bridged. And also, I think we need activities to promote this, understanding of human dignity that lies within oneself. So, actually, if I could put my first question to you, what would you recommend that we as an institution do? What are the kind of activities that you'd like us to engage in? Because you know Lady Doe College so well.
Well, first of all, Principal, saying thanks so much. and no apology is necessary. When you're the principal, I do have an understanding of just how very busy and how you're pulled in so many different directions in the interests of Lady Doak College. So I am honored that you are here, and I appreciate your very gracious words of thanks. And you're quite right. I have come to have great fond regard for Lady Doak. And I think in this context, I've come to see more clearly than ever that respect for human dignity is part of the mission and the history of Lady Doak College. You know, from those early years with Katie Wilcox, the Doak family, the early Tamil educators, there was this understanding that women have dignity, that women can and should be educated, that women can play leadership roles. And so, to me, I think of Lady Doak, I think of this decades-long, you know, commitment. And of course, now I understand more deeply the role that Dr. Elizabeth George played in that. And it was so interesting to see the video that you all put together. And perhaps the audio didn't work well, but it didn't matter. I thought the visuals told the story so well about Elizabeth George and the depth and commitment that she brought. So in that context, I would just say, in response to your question, in many ways, Lady Doak is already doing the right things. You know, when I think about who you are in terms of your mission and your history, and how incredibly well not just your faculty and staff, but your students, when we have students come here to Mary Baldwin, they know the history and the mission of Lady Doak. And that is so important. And I think many American students at different colleges are not really all that cognizant of the history of their institution. That is not true at Lady Doak. So the fact that you inculcate this understanding of Katie Wilcox, of the early years, recognizing Elizabeth George, that history and that mission. So first of all, I think in many ways you're doing the right thing. A second thing might sound a little odd, but the first time I came to Lady Doak, perhaps 15 years ago, I remember seeing a few signs around campus saying no ragging. Well, ragging is a term that's used in British English, not American English. But as many of you know, I do hail from Britain originally, so I understood what it meant, but I was puzzled by it because I didn't know very much about Indian education and about the dynamics between children and youth in India. And it led me to ask questions and to study a little bit about bullying and ragging. And by the way, this is not just Lady Doak, and this is not just India. I had a very similar conversation with a Japanese scholar who spent 3 years at Mary Baldwin and wrote her a thesis on how to address bullying or ragging in Japan and Japanese schools. So this is not unique to India by any means. But I was struck at the time about the concerted efforts to address this issue, to make it public, not to whitewash it or hide it, but to have workshops and to have student leaders as well as faculty illustrate treating people with respect and not allowing anyone to go into that sinkhole of verbal abuse. As I mentioned, that's a violation of human dignity, where somebody, because they're different, it might be different because of their caste, it might be different because of their personality, it might be different because, I don't know, they come from another part of India. There are all sorts of reasons. But too often, difference becomes a point of violation of dignity. I don't think that Lady Doak does that. I think, for example, your International Studies Center is a bastion of strength and commitment to recognizing human diversity. And so that, making that part of your institution, and it's not, I would just add, and that it's not just study abroad, although we love having your students at Mary Baldwin, and we have 2 wonderful students now. It's also teaching students what it means to be part of another culture, to speak other languages, and to respect that, and to see that these people are human too. So I guess my answer is you're doing so many of the right things already.
Thank you, Dr. Rodriguez. We really take it seriously, and our mission, like you rightly pointed out, it is to reach out to people across all communities, caste or creed, and we believe in it. I was just wondering how we could even strengthen it even further. And yeah, probably we could do a lot of brainstorming together.
Yes.
But learning to speak without fear, learning to accept differences, understanding the world as it is, that the world is full of different people with different ideas. If all our 4,000 plus students every year could understand that they have a right to voice their sentiments, and so also our teachers and our non-teaching staff, I think we could be that little drop in the ocean that
Yeah.
has an
Yeah.
impact on the rest of the world.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, of course.
Thank you, Dr. Chris. I have few questions in the chat box. This is from Ruchita. Hi, sir. Myself, Ruchita. My question is, why is it critical to value a person's human dignity?
Oh, thank you for the question. I think it's sometimes in philosophy we say it's a core normative value. And what that means is we increasingly understand who people are as a species, our biological and our genetic heritage. And, as Homo sapiens, and we know as Homo sapiens, we're not all that different, for all of our cultural differences in biological terms. We're not all that different at all. Genetic terms, we're hardly different at all. So this is a normative commitment. It's a value commitment. And it's saying we're hardly different at all when it comes to recognizing that we all have dignity. So in a way, I say this in a community of faith, it is a statement of faith. It's a statement of secular faith. It's a statement that we all have equal worth. And we need to begin our relationships with others with this recognition. This is true, whether it's in an interpersonal context or whether it's in a civic context or in a work context, at least in my view. We need to begin with that core commitment. Now, this doesn't mean, I want you as a student and all students to know, this doesn't mean we have to like everybody. This doesn't mean we all have the same personalities. This doesn't mean we don't have different cultures and different ways of thinking and doing things. Of course we do. But underlying all of those differences of culture and personality, there is this, just like we have a shared biological heritage as Homo sapiens, we have a shared normative commitment across all cultures to our inherent human dignity. To me, it is an essential starting point for relationships at all levels. Thank you for asking me.
Good evening, Dr. Owen. There is another question from one of our UG students. She has asked, is human dignity valued everywhere?
Well, the short answer to that is no, it's not. And, we see around the world, the most obvious examples and the most terrible examples are with warfare and genocide and the use of weapons of mass destruction. I am not a utopian. I'm not somebody who believes that we live in a perfect world. There are violations. There are also smaller violations that do take place in workplaces. Like I said, I think when I was a younger man in my 20s, I was surprised to see violations taking place in schools and colleges and churches. They weren't terrible. They didn't lead to violence, but they can happen. And so dignity violations do take place around the world. And so my research and my talk is not a statement that there are no violations. Rather, it's a statement that we need to be more cognizant of why a commitment to dignity is important and why we need to be teaching it at all levels to children and youth, but also as forms of continuing and professional development to people in different kinds of work settings. So yes, there are violations of dignity in many ways, but we just need to be aware of them and we need to educate the next generation on how to avoid them. Again, thank you for the question.
Thank you, participants. Do you have any more questions? Yeah, there is another question from Harini. When dignity is considered as humans' intrinsic value to one humanity, why does society still categorize it based on gender, ability, and status, even in the modern world?
Yeah. Isn't it sad? I mean, your question is a very realistic question, and it is a sad fact that your comment is right on target. There are still cultural contexts in which dignity is overlooked or even undermined or attacked. It does still happen. Sometimes it happens on the basis of caste. I think of Writing with Fire as addressing those things right there within India, the group of women journalists in India. I think of the Black Lives Matter movement right here in the United States, and the recognition that too often people of color in the United States have had their rights violated, but also in some cases even their very dignity, their inherent worth has been violated. So I think it partly happens because of that other, remember I talked a little bit about the me and the I, the William James idea. And I think that too often we are still rooted in the me. We don't, we allow individuals and cultures to focus on that aspect of our innate biological self that focuses on ego-driven behavior, self-survival, in the face of conflict, to fight or to flee. That is a part of human nature. There's no question that the me is a part of human nature. But we're more than that. I think William James is right. There is an I. And by going to places like Lady Doak and Mary Baldwin, you're cultivating the higher self, the I within you. It's not that we won't recognize the demands of the ego, the temptation to succumb to the self and the demands of the self and self-preservation. But the I is, it's more than a rational self. And I think James is right. It's a rational, but it's also a deeper emotional self. It's a more secure, more mature self. And that's what we need to appeal to move beyond those all too frequent elements in our cultures and in our society that still seek to demean others or give others second-class citizenship. Are we there yet? No, we're not there in India or America and others. But that doesn't mean that we can't speak the right message, that we can't teach dignity, and that we can't seek to uphold it and overcome violations. At least, as Principal Singh said, at least in the tiny drop of our own family and our own communities. We have to start somewhere. If we can start at Lady Doak, if we can start at Mary Baldwin, that's a place to start. And I believe that we're not alone. I think there are others who seek to truly recognize dignity and appeal to the higher self, the I. Thanks again.
Participants, any more questions? There is another question from one of our PG students. What would you consider to be the modern threats to the dignity and value of human?
Well, again, it's a good question. I think they happen, at least in my view, in two different ways. One are the very gross, violent threats, just as we have been seeing in the Congo or in the Ukraine today. There are those threats that are based in political and sociological, socio-cultural violence and actual warfare and genocide. Those go so deep that the world community must address those. I know the United Nations is not perfect. The United Nations can be part of the answer. I know Doctors Without Borders doesn't always find its way to everywhere, but Doctors Without Borders can be part of the answer. So many faith-based organizations that are global in scope have a role to play in addressing when fundamental violent violations of human dignity take place. I live just 25 miles south of a Mennonite community. This is a Christian community that is engaged in pacifism and relief work. They're very small they're a very small group around the world, but their commitment is to global mission in service of people who are hungry, people who have been threatened with violence. So there are groups of people who seek to address these violations at that level. The other level has to do, and I really spoke more about this second level in my address, has to do with violations of dignity in workplaces and in civil settings. They're not violent, they're not genocidal, but nevertheless, they create work environments families sometimes where people feel threatened and insecure, where they either want to run away or they want to aggressively fight back because the me of them is angry. Or you know what else happens so often, especially I think there are gender differences. So many girls and women, what they do is they suppress. They just stay quiet. They don't say or do anything. You know, all three of those are dysfunctional responses when you're in a setting where dignity, inherent dignity, is not recognized. Those sometimes are harder to identify. But there are women and men increasingly who are trained as mediators. I mentioned Doctors Without Borders. Did you know that there's an organization called Mediators Without Borders? There are people who are being trained through the Alliance for Peace Building and also affiliated with the Institute for Peace in Washington, and I know there are other similar settings in other countries. There are people associated with Gandhi networks in India to this day who also want to take these messages out into the community, into workplaces, so that people, first of all, so leaders understand when they are violating dignity, because sometimes they're just simply unaware. Sometimes they just don't recognize that what they're doing is intimidating or doesn't truly acknowledge the identity of people. Other times there are leaders who need to be more directly challenged. So there are those two levels of identifying dignity and working through them. I am sorry to tell you, though, given your question, I don't think there are any easy answers. There are no easy answers when you talk about these aspects of human nature. Instead, what I hope my message is, it's one of hope. We're not doomed by being members of Homo sapiens to being an egotistical, selfish, and violent species. We have it in us, but we are also a species that's fully capable of trust, of cooperation, and of holding on to those most important normative values. When we do that, when we respond to the deeper I in ourselves, then we are truly noble, and we have hope for a world with far less violence and far less dignity violations in different settings. Thanks again for such a thoughtful question.
Thank you, sir, for patiently answering all our questions. Now I invite Dr. Christiana Singh, our beloved Principal and Secretary, Lady Doak College, to share her thoughts. Over to you, ma'am.
Well, Dr. Owen, what else can I say than it's been such a pleasant end to our day. But our day doesn't end over here. It leads into another day. And you have given us food for thought to carry on. Again, coming back to what you said earlier, a little earlier, I mean, your talk, you mentioned about social pain being real. And yes, I think that was a slide that contained the words of the Dalai Lama. You said, you can cure the world with a lot of love. More loving we are, the healthier and happier we are. In fact, that's a faith statement as well, because, you know, our faith tells us to love as God has loved. So if we're going to lead a lot of people and we're going to, you know, show others the way, then we've got to practice that part. You have made us realize that even though this human dignity is inherent and it's in everyone, I think a lot of the problem is that the awareness is missing, that it is in everyone. So my first thought along the process is, how do we make people realize that there's something special in the way that they've been created? Because God, I believe that God doesn't make mistakes. He just knows every one of his creation and he's placed them exactly where he wants them to be. And my commitment, or the commitment that I would make on behalf of Lady Doak College, after having listened to what you have what you have shared with us, is that we will endeavor all the more to reinforce this, that they are, each individual in this community is special. We make them realize it, and that's probably the best way ever that they take this message across to wherever they are, to the society that they live in, or wherever they go. So thank you for giving us what seems to be a tough job to do, but we have set ourselves a goal. And probably you made us think our programs, like you said, our value education program, our human rights, women's studies, whatever it is, and even our own disciplines. We talk about, the Lady Doe College emblem talks about being the light of the world, that little light that shines to dispel darkness, or the fragrance from the jasmine flower. Okay, even if you don't see it, you can smell it, and that's a commitment that we as Dokins would take. And the fragrance that we want to spread after having listened to you is that we want to make every individual in our community, all the people that God has put in our lives, feel valued, because there is an inherent dignity about them. So we will promote that culture. Thank you for giving us, sharing your insights with us. Thank you for challenging us. And thank you once again for being a part of our family. God bless you.
Thank you.
And on behalf of the college, Anita, do you want to say anything, or do I thank one and all for being present and participating in this lecture?
And we have a formal vote of thanks
Okay,
after this.
sorry. Yeah, sure, go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. No duty is more urgent than that of returning thanks. May I request John Joyce Georgina Thomas, Assistant Professor, Department of Social Sciences, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Good evening, one and all. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay. It's my pleasure to be here and to be thanking each and every one of you for this session. I would like to thanking God for His divine providence in organizing this lecture in spite of the time zone difference, and for His grace to not have any technical glitches during this session. I think it's really His providence that we were able to go through without any technical glitches. So we really thank God for His providence. We thank Dr. Elizabeth George's family for their graciousness for this memorial series lectures that we're able to have, for their constant support to the department, to the college. A real pleasure to thank Dr. Owen for being with us in spite of a busy schedule, the time zone difference, to be able to put dignity, humility, the humiliation, the power of dignity, leadership all together. So many concepts in such a little time, and to be able to make sense to all our students. So we really thank you for your presence, for making this such a beautiful occasion for us to be listening to you. We cannot go without thanking our principal, Dr. Christiana Singh, for joining us in spite of our tight schedules, other programs, commitments, and for being here and adding life to this program. Thank you, ma'am, for being here. We would like to thank Dr. Carolyn, Dr. Cynthia, Dr. Rupa, our beloved staff members who've been with us earlier, and for their constant support to the department, for taking time with us to join us, being their constant light to be helping us, advising us, guiding us through the entire event, not just this event, but other events of the departments as well. On behalf of the department officially, I'd like to thank Ms. Preeti, Ms. Saraswati, and the CCM and the management for their support in the technical side of this event, because really difficult to manage everything together. So really big thank you to you guys for being on campus so late and being there helping us with this program. Thank you. I thank our head of the department, Dr. Anita, who's an extremely integral part of this entire lecture series. The constant support, encouragement, guidances without missing a single thing, to be there, reminding us for each and everything. Thank you, Anita, for that support and constant light to be depending upon, a pillar to be dependent upon. So thank you. All our faculty members of the Department of Social Sciences, without your small assistance, this program would not be possible. So a big thank you to all the faculty members and a special thank you to Ms. Sharon, my co-coordinator for this event, for being there to pitch in for a lot of things in spite of my phone difficulty. So really big thank you, Sharon. And all our retired staff members, our well-wishers, alumni, everyone who have been here supporting us, our friends and families, for your constant support, encouragements. I want to extend a thank you, a big thank you to all the heads of the departments in the Lady Doak College, the students from our own department, social sciences, from the other departments who are joining us through the MS Teams, through the YouTube, all our YouTube viewers, especially for being here, well in time being here, and all the wonderful questions, the thought-provoking questions, for being able to add life to this program. So big thank you to you guys. Last but not the least, each and every student here on this program. Without you guys, this program would not go through. So big thank you to you guys. And in case I have missed anyone, extremely sorry for that. I thank each and everyone who have been instrumental in making this program wonderful. Thank you one and all. Have a blessed evening. Have a nice week as well ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Joyce. As we conclude, wherever we are, let's turn on our videos if possible and rise up for National Anthem. Once again, thank you everyone for sparing your time and attending this program. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Thank you so once again.
Thank you. I know we're signing off. I just wanted to again thank you all as the organizers of this, and with the tech support and inviting me in the first place. This was a special experience for me, and I appreciate all your time and effort to make this happen at all levels. Thanks so much. Vanakkam.